Alpha King was pulled from an echoing abyss by Omega, then asked why her name echoed there first. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. David King, known as the Alpha King, stood at the edge of the abyss, his gaze fixed on the vast, swirling void before him. This was no ordinary chasm. It was a place where time and space seemed to twist, where the past and future collided in an eternal echo. David had been trapped here, lost in the silence and darkness, for what felt like an eternity. The weight of his own failure, his broken past, pressed down on him, making every breath a struggle. He had once been the ruler, the king, the one who commanded respect and power, but now, he was nothing more than a shadow of his former self. His once strong will had faltered, and he had been pulled into this abyss by forces beyond his control. The void seemed endless, an unyielding reminder of the mistakes that had led him here. The echo of his own name whispered in the air, bouncing off the walls of the abyss, a cruel reminder of what he had lost. The silence was broken only by the sound of his heartbeat, a steady rhythm that reminded him he was still alive, still fighting, even if he didn't know how much longer he could hold on. And then, as if from nowhere, there was a sudden pull, a force strong enough to break the silence and drag him from the depths. It wasn't a person, not at first. It was more like a presence, an energy that seemed to reach out to him from beyond the void. The force was undeniable, pulling him upward, out of the abyss. His body protested, aching from the strain, but it was no use. He was being pulled from the darkness, drawn toward a light he couldn't see. When he finally broke free of the abyss, gasping for air, he was met with the sight of a woman. She stood before him, her presence commanding and serene. Her name was Isla Turner, the Omega. Unlike David, who had once been the epitome of power, Isla carried an aura of quiet strength. Her eyes, deep and knowing, met his, and she spoke without hesitation. "Why did your name echo here first?" she asked. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, a hint of something ancient and untold. David stared at her, still disoriented from his escape. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "You pulled me from the abyss. But why? Why is it your name that echoes here?" Isla's gaze softened for a moment, but the mystery in her eyes remained. She didn't answer right away, but instead, she extended a hand toward him, offering him a chance to rise. David hesitated but then took her hand. As their fingers met, he felt a strange warmth, as if something long buried inside him had begun to stir. It wasn't just the warmth of her touch, though. It was something deeper, something unspoken. The abyss had broken him, but Isla, Omega, was the one to save him. And as he stood, still recovering from the chaos of the abyss, he couldn't help but wonder, why had it been her name that echoed there first? What was it about Isla Turner, the Omega, that connected her to this place of darkness and endless echoes? His journey with her had just begun, and already, there were more questions than answers. David stood there, his hand still holding Isla's, as the last vestiges of the abyss seemed to fade into nothingness. The light around them was dim but steady, casting soft shadows on the rocks beneath their feet. For the first time in what felt like forever, he was free. Free from the crushing weight of the abyss, free from the darkness that had held him captive. But even as the physical grip of the void loosened, his mind was still tangled in its shadows. What was it about Isla? How had she found him? And why had her name echoed in that place before his own? Isla's calm presence seemed to fill the space around them, an unspoken strength radiating from her. She didn't rush him, just stood quietly as he processed everything. Her eyes never left his, waiting for him to speak, but giving him the time to gather his thoughts. The question she had asked still lingered in the air between them, heavy and unresolved. "Why did your name echo here first?" Isla repeated, her voice gentle, but there was a quiet intensity to it. "What does it mean?" David finally managed to ask, his voice still rough from his ordeal. The question hung in the air, and for a long moment, Isla didn't answer. Instead, She looked down at their joined hands, almost as if contemplating something that stretched far beyond this moment. The abyss, she began softly, is not just a place. It's a reflection of your deepest fears, regrets, and desires. It amplifies what you are, what you've become, and what you cannot escape. And sometimes it echoes. She paused, as if searching for the right words. When I pulled you out, David, it wasn't just about saving you from the darkness. It was about pulling you from something deeper, a place where you lost yourself, a place where you had forgotten who you truly are. David frowned, trying to make sense of her words. He wasn't sure what she meant by losing himself, but he could feel the weight of it. The abyss had been a prison, yes, but it had also been a mirror. He had seen everything he had failed at, every mistake he had made, and it had been almost impossible to escape. But why? Why was it your name that echoed first? He asked again, unable to shake the mystery. Isla's gaze softened, and for the first time since they had met, there was a flicker of something personal in her eyes, a glimpse into a past that she hadn't yet shared. I've been to the abyss before, she said, her voice quiet but steady. I've been lost in it, just like you. And just like you, I had to fight my way out. It's a part of me, David. It's part of who I am. Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. David didn't know what to say at first. Part of him wanted to ask more, to demand answers, but another part of him simply stood there, stunned by the depth of her words. Isla had been in the abyss too. He had assumed she was just a guide, a savior, but now he realized there was much more to her than that. She wasn't just here to help him. She was here because she understood the abyss in a way he could not yet comprehend. So, David began, trying to process what she had said. You're saying that the abyss, it knows us? Isla nodded slowly. Yes, it knows everything about you. Your fears, your regrets, your deepest self. It shows you what you're afraid to face, and it doesn't let go until you confront it. David looked down at his hands, still feeling the lingering pull of the abyss in his bones. He had faced so much down there, memories he'd buried, mistakes he could never take back. It had been a battle, but he had never truly faced it. He had only run from it. But Isla, she understood. She had fought the same battle. I don't know if I can face it, he said quietly, more to himself than to her. I don't know if I'm strong enough. Isla stepped closer, her presence like a quiet anchor in the storm of his thoughts. You are strong enough, she said simply. You just need to remember who you are. The abyss only holds you as long as you let it. David looked up at her then, his eyes searching hers for some sign of what he should do next. Isla didn't give him any easy answers, but in that moment, he realized that she wasn't trying to save him. She was trying to help him save himself. And that, in its own way, was the most powerful thing of all. The air around them was thick with the remnants of the abyss, still lingering like a faint echo in the back of David's mind. He stood there, eyes locked on Isla, his thoughts swirling in confusion. She had told him that the abyss only held him as long as he allowed it. But how could he escape something so deeply ingrained within himself? How could he find his way back when he felt like he had lost everything? Isla must have sensed his struggle, for she spoke again, her voice soft but firm. The first step is understanding that you are not alone, David. The abyss tries to convince you that you are. It makes you feel like no one can save you, that you're beyond hope. But that's a lie. You're not alone. Her words struck something deep inside him. The abyss had made him feel isolated, cut off from everyone and everything. It had torn apart his sense of self, leaving him adrift in a sea of doubts. But Isla, standing there in front of him, was proof that there was still something real, something tangible beyond the darkness. He looked at her, still unsure of how to move forward. I don't even know who I am anymore, he admitted quietly. I don't know if I can ever be the person I was before. Isla's gaze softened, and for a moment, she simply watched him, as if waiting for him to find his own way. Then, slowly, she spoke again. You don't have to be the person you were before, David. You don't need to return to what you were. What you need is to understand who you are now. The abyss might have broken you, but it didn't destroy you. You're still here. And that means you have the strength to rebuild yourself. There was an undeniable truth in her words. David had spent so much time trying to hold on to the past, trying to be the man he once was, that he had forgotten the person he could become. The past was gone, and no matter how hard he tried, he could never go back. But that didn't mean he was doomed. The future was still open, still full of possibilities. He could still change, still grow, still rebuild. But only if he let go of the past. Isla's presence was a steady anchor in the storm of his thoughts. She wasn't just guiding him out of the abyss. She was helping him rediscover himself, helping him understand that he could be more than just the sum of his failures. It wasn't going to be easy. Nothing about this journey would be simple. But with Isla by his side, he felt a flicker of hope, a tiny spark of something he hadn't felt in a long time. "I'm scared," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm scared that I'll fail again, that I won't be strong enough." Isla didn't say anything at first. She simply stepped closer, her presence grounding him, her hand gently resting on his shoulder. "It's okay to be scared," she said softly. "Fear is a part of the journey. It doesn't mean you won't succeed. It just means that you're brave enough to try." David took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words settle into his chest. The fear was still there, but so was something else, a quiet resolve, a glimmer of determination that he hadn't realized was still inside him. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel completely broken. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start rebuilding. As the two of them stood together in the dim light of the world they now found themselves in, David realized that the abyss was no longer a place that defined him. It had been a chapter, yes, but it wasn't the end of his story. He still had a future to fight for. And with Isla by his side, he finally felt ready to face it. The world around them was silent, save for the soft rustle of the wind that seemed to move in rhythm with the steady beat of David's heart. The weight of the past still clung to him, but with each passing moment, he felt himself shedding it, piece by piece. The abyss had left its mark, but it no longer had the power to define him. He stood there, breathing deeply, and for the first time in a long while, he felt something resembling peace. Isla, standing next to him, had been a constant presence, steady, unwavering. Her calm demeanor was a stark contrast to the chaos that had consumed him for so long. She had not just pulled him from the abyss. She had helped him find the strength to stand on his own again. "Isla," David began, his voice more certain than it had been in days. "What happens now?" Isla's eyes met his, her expression soft but resolute. "Now, David, you begin the real journey. The abyss may have shown you your fears, your regrets, but that was only the beginning. The path ahead of you is where you will find out who you truly are." The words hung in the air, and David felt the weight of them. For so long, he had been trapped in the shadows of his own failures, but now, for the first time, he could see a glimmer of light ahead. The journey was far from over, but it was no longer something he faced alone. "How do I begin?" he asked, looking to her for guidance. Isla smiled, a small, reassuring curve of her lips. "By accepting that you don't need to have all the answers. You don't need to know everything about the future. You just need to take the next step." She paused for a moment before continuing. "We're all on a journey, David. Everyone, whether they realize it or not, is walking their own path. And some paths are harder than others. But that doesn't mean you can't find your way." David absorbed her words, feeling a sense of calm begin to settle over him. The fear of the unknown, the fear of failure, still lingered, but it no longer seemed as overwhelming. It was just another part of the journey. As they began walking forward, the landscape around them shifted. The rocky terrain gave way to open fields, bathed in the soft light of the setting sun. The world was quiet, peaceful, but David knew that this was only a brief respite. The true test lay ahead, and the abyss was never far behind. "Do you ever wonder," David asked, his gaze drifting toward the horizon, "how we find our way out of the darkness?" Isla's eyes softened as she watched him, a knowing look passing between them. "It's not about finding your way out, David," she said quietly. "It's about finding your way through. Darkness is a part of life, but it doesn't last forever. The light always comes back, even when you think it's gone." David nodded, feeling the truth of her words settle deep within him. He had been looking for an escape, for a way to outrun the darkness. But Isla was right. It wasn't about running. It was about walking through it, facing it, and trusting that the light would return. The path ahead wasn't clear, but with Isla by his side, David knew he wasn't walking it alone. They moved forward, step by step, into the unknown, both of them carrying the weight of their pasts, but no longer defined by them. The abyss had been a part of their journey, but it was not the end of the road. and with each step they took, the future seemed just a little bit brighter. The journey ahead was not as clear as David had hoped, but there was something different about it. The shadows of the abyss no longer loomed over him with the same suffocating weight. With every step he took, a sense of possibility bloomed inside him. The landscape around him, though still unfamiliar, no longer felt like a threatening unknown. Instead, it felt like a space waiting to be discovered, much like the man he was slowly becoming. Isla walked beside him, her pace steady and calm, a silent companion who seemed to understand the weight of his thoughts without him needing to speak them aloud. "How do you keep going?" David asked, his voice low, almost hesitant. The question had been on his mind for some time, and now, as they walked under the soft glow of the setting sun, it felt like the right moment to ask. Isla glanced at him, her expression thoughtful, before answering in a way that made David realize how much more there was to learn from her. "I keep going because I trust that the next step is always a chance to grow," she said quietly. "The path may be uncertain, but as long as I keep moving forward, I learn more about myself with every step. You don't need to have all the answers, David. You just need to trust that you will find them when the time comes." Her words resonated deeply with him. He had been so focused on the idea of having everything figured out that he had forgotten the value of simply moving forward, of trusting the process. The fear of the unknown had held him back for so long. But now, in Isla's company, he realized that sometimes the greatest strength comes from letting go of the need for certainty and allowing life to unfold as it will. "I used to think I had to have all the answers," David said, his voice more reflective now. "I thought that if I didn't, I'd fail." Isla smiled softly, a small, reassuring curve of her lips. "We all think that at first. But the truth is, failure isn't the end. It's just part of the journey. Every mistake, every setback is an opportunity to learn and grow. As long as you keep moving, you'll always have the chance to rise again." There was a lightness in David's chest now, a flicker of hope that he hadn't felt in what seemed like an eternity. Isla's words were like a balm, soothing the doubts that had plagued him for so long. The path ahead, though still uncertain, didn't seem as daunting as it once had. They walked in silence for a while, the soft sound of their footsteps the only thing breaking the stillness of the evening. David's mind wandered to the future, to the challenges that lay ahead. He still didn't know what the road would look like, or what would come of this journey. But he understood, now more than ever, that it wasn't the destination that mattered. It was the journey itself. As they reached a clearing, the first stars began to twinkle in the sky, small, distant points of light in the vast expanse above them. David stopped for a moment, looking up at the night sky. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he had a place in the world, a part to play in something much bigger than himself. Isla stood beside him, her gaze also fixed on the sky, and in that moment, David understood something profound. The abyss had not been the end of him, but the beginning of a new chapter. He wasn't defined by the darkness he had faced. He was defined by how he chose to move forward from it. And with that realization, he took the next step, walking into the unknown with a heart full of possibilities, no longer afraid of what lay ahead. The days passed in a quiet rhythm as David and Isla journeyed together, the world around them gradually shifting from the stillness of the abyss to the soft warmth of an awakening landscape. The air felt different here, fresh and alive, carrying the promise of new beginnings. As they walked side by side, David began to notice how the simple act of moving forward, of putting one foot in front of the other, seemed to ease the weight in his chest. The fears that had once clung to him like a shadow seemed a little less heavy now. He wasn't free of them, but they no longer controlled him. He was learning to live alongside them. Isla, ever the steady presence, seemed to sense his shift. "You're doing well," she said one evening as they sat by a small campfire, the crackling flames a comforting sound in the quiet night. "You've come a long way from where you were when I first found you." David looked into the fire, watching the flickering flames dance. It was strange how much had changed in such a short time. He had started this journey unsure of who he was, lost in the darkness of his own mind. But now, with Isla's steady guidance, he felt like he was slowly finding his way again. "I still don't know what the future holds," David said, his voice thoughtful. "But I'm not as afraid of it as I was before." Isla smiled, a look of quiet pride in her eyes. "Fear is a part of every journey," she said. It's natural, but it doesn't have to control you. The future is always uncertain, but that's what makes it so full of possibility. David nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. For so long, he had let fear dictate his every move. He had been afraid of making mistakes, afraid of facing the things he had buried inside. But now, with Isla's help, he was beginning to see that fear didn't have to hold him back. He didn't need to have all the answers, and that was okay. The journey was about learning, growing, and discovering who he was as he went. The next day, as they continued their path through the forest, David found himself more at ease. The landscape around them was becoming less unfamiliar. The trees, the soft hum of the wind, the distant sound of a stream. It all felt like a quiet reminder that life continued, that the world was still turning, and that he was a part of it. He had spent so much time in the abyss, in his own mind, that he had forgotten what it felt like to just be in the world, to simply exist without the weight of his past constantly bearing down on him. As they reached the edge of a clearing, Isla paused, turning to face him. "You're stronger than you think, David," she said. "And you're not alone. You don't have to do this by yourself." David met her gaze, the sincerity in her eyes grounding him. He knew she was right. He had spent so much time in isolation, thinking that he had to face everything alone, but Isla's presence, her unwavering support, had shown him that he didn't have to carry the burden by himself. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice filled with gratitude. Isla simply nodded, her expression soft. "No need to thank me. This journey is yours, David. I'm just here to help you find your way." And with that, they continued walking, side by side, into the future. David still didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time in a long time, he felt ready to face it, to take each step with a newfound sense of purpose. The abyss was no longer his destination. It was just a chapter in a much larger story, one that was still unfolding. And with each step, he felt a little more like himself, a little more certain of his own strength. The future was uncertain, but with Isla by his side, David knew that whatever came next, he would not face it alone. The days continued to pass as David and Isla made their way through the ever-changing landscape. The world around them was a vast canvas, colors shifting with each step they took. They had entered a forest now, the trees towering above them, their branches forming a canopy that filtered the sunlight into soft, golden beams. It was quiet here, the only sounds being the rustling of leaves in the wind and the distant chirp of birds. David felt a sense of calm wash over him as they walked, the stillness of the world around him reflecting the stillness he now felt within. He had come so far, from the darkness of the abyss to this peaceful place, and though the journey was far from over, he no longer felt the overwhelming weight of his past. "Do you ever stop to think about how far we've come?" David asked, breaking the silence. Isla, who had been walking ahead, glanced over her shoulder at him. "All the time," she replied with a small smile. "But I don't dwell on it. I prefer to look forward." David thought about that for a moment. He had spent so much of his life looking back, replaying every mistake, every wrong turn he had ever made. But Isla was different. She didn't seem burdened by her past. She had learned from it, and now she moved forward with a quiet confidence. "I think I'm starting to understand what you mean," he said, his voice thoughtful. "For so long, I was afraid of what came next because I didn't know how to escape my past. But now it feels like I'm finally starting to let go of it." Isla nodded, her expression softening. "It's not easy," she said. "Letting go of the past is one of the hardest things to do, but it's also one of the most freeing." They walked on for a while in silence, each lost in their thoughts. The path ahead was still unclear, but for the first time, David didn't feel like he was stumbling through it blindly. He was walking with purpose, with a quiet understanding that the road was his to shape. As they reached a clearing, the sun was beginning to set, casting a warm orange glow across the sky. David stopped for a moment, looking up at the vast expanse above him. There was something about the way the sky stretched out, endless and open, that reminded him of the possibilities before him. "What do you think will come next?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Isla turned to him, her eyes reflecting the fading light of the day. "I don't know," she said. "But I do know that you're not the same person you were when we started this journey. You've already made it farther than you think." David smiled faintly, the weight of her words sinking in. He had come a long way, yes, but he also knew that the real work was just beginning. The future was still uncertain, but he was no longer afraid of it. He was no longer afraid of what lay ahead. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, leaving behind a sky filled with stars, David felt a quiet sense of peace settle over him. The abyss was no longer a part of him. It was something he had left behind. The journey wasn't over, but he was no longer walking through it alone. With Isla by his side, he knew he was ready for whatever came next. The path ahead was his to walk, and for the first time, he truly believed he could face whatever it held. The night grew cooler as the stars above began to shine brighter, painting the sky with their quiet, distant light. David and Isla sat by the campfire, the soft crackling of the flames the only sound breaking the silence between them. There was a stillness to the air, a peacefulness that felt almost surreal after the long journey they had been on. David couldn't help but reflect on how far he had come, from the darkness of the abyss to this moment of calm. He had walked a path that was both literal and metaphorical, and now, as he sat here beside Isla, he realized how much of himself he had discovered along the way. Isla, he said after a long pause, his voice filled with quiet curiosity. Do you think we ever really find what we're looking for? Isla turned her gaze toward him, her expression calm but thoughtful. I think we find what we need, she said gently, her voice carrying the weight of experience. Sometimes, it's not the destination that matters. It's the journey itself. It's the lessons we learn, the people we meet, and the strength we find within ourselves when we least expect it. David thought about that. He had spent so much of his life searching for something that would make everything make sense, something that would fix the broken parts of him. But now, he understood that it wasn't about finding the perfect solution or the perfect ending. It was about the steps he took, the choices he made, and the person he was becoming along the way. I used to think that I had to fix everything, David continued, his voice thoughtful. That if I could just fix the past, everything would be okay. But I'm starting to see that maybe the past isn't something that can be fixed. Maybe it's just something we have to accept. Isla nodded slowly, a quiet understanding in her eyes. Accepting the past doesn't mean you condone it or that you forget it, she said. It means that you no longer let it control you. You take what you can from it, learn from it, and then you move forward. It's not about fixing what's broken. It's about finding peace with it and allowing yourself to heal. David gazed into the fire, the flickering flames reflecting the turmoil that had once burned within him. He had tried for so long to outrun his past, to fix the mistakes and regrets that had weighed him down. But now, he realized that the true power came from letting go of that need for control. The fire before him seemed to symbolize that process, its flames constantly shifting, never static, yet always part of something greater. He was no longer trapped by the ashes of his past. I think I'm starting to understand, he said quietly. It's not about fixing everything. It's about accepting it and choosing to move forward. Isla smiled, a soft, knowing smile that made David feel like he was exactly where he was meant to be. Exactly, she said. You can't change what's already been done, but you can change how you move forward. That's where your power lies. As they sat there, the fire burning low, David realized that he wasn't just healing. He was transforming. Every step he had taken with Isla had been part of a much larger process of reclaiming his life, of shedding the skin of who he thought he had to be and discovering who he truly was. And while the journey was far from over, he felt more prepared for it than ever before. With Isla by his side, he knew that he was no longer walking alone. Together, they would face whatever came next. And with that thought, David finally felt the quiet peace of acceptance settle over him, knowing that he was no longer defined by the darkness of his past, but by the strength he had found in choosing to move forward. The morning arrived quietly, the soft glow of dawn breaking through the trees, casting a warm light across the forest floor. David stood at the edge of the clearing, gazing out at the horizon. The world felt different now, quieter in a way that was not suffocating, but comforting. There was peace in the stillness, a kind of peace he had never known before. It wasn't the absence of struggle or hardship, but the acceptance that struggle was a part of life, something to be embraced rather than feared. Isla stood beside him, her gaze also directed towards the distance. The sun was rising slowly, the first rays of light illuminating the world in soft hues of gold and pink. It was a new day, a new beginning, and David felt it deep within himself. Isla, he said after a long pause, his voice calm. Do you ever wonder if the journey will ever truly end? Isla turned her head slightly, meeting his gaze with a quiet, knowing look. The journey never truly ends, David, she said softly. It evolves. Life is a series of chapters, each one different, but all connected. We grow, we learn, and we change with each step we take. Her words resonated with him. He had spent so much time thinking that one day, the journey would come to an end, that there would be a moment when he would have everything figured out, when the weight of the past would finally release its grip on him. But now, he understood that the journey was not about reaching a final destination. It was about the moments in between, the steps taken along the way, the lessons learned, and the people met. I used to think there was a point where everything would just make sense, David said, his voice thoughtful. But I think now I understand that it's not about having all the answers. It's about embracing the uncertainty and finding peace with it. Isla smiled softly, a look of pride in her eyes. Exactly, she said. The beauty of life is in its uncertainty. It's in the journey, not the destination. We can't control everything, but we can choose how we respond to what life brings us. And that is where our power lies. David nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle into his heart. For so long, he had been focused on the destination, on the idea of reaching some final, perfect moment where everything would be resolved. But now, he saw that the true meaning was in the journey itself. It wasn't about the end. It was about how he lived through the moments, how he chose to face the challenges, how he grew from them. I'm not afraid anymore, David said quietly, almost to himself. I'm not afraid of what comes next. Isla's gaze softened, and for the first time, David saw a flicker of something deeper in her eyes. It was not a look of pity or sympathy, but one of understanding, as if she knew exactly what he meant. You've come a long way, David, she said, her voice steady and filled with quiet pride. And you will continue to grow. The journey may never be easy, but you're strong enough to face whatever comes. Just remember, you're never alone. You have the strength within you to navigate whatever lies ahead. David looked at her, the bond between them feeling stronger than ever. They had both come from places of darkness, from places where the weight of the world felt too much to bear. But now, they were walking forward, not just as survivors of their pasts, but as people ready to embrace the future, whatever it might hold. The path ahead was uncertain, yes, but that uncertainty no longer felt like something to fear. With Isla by his side, David knew that he could face whatever challenges came next. Together, they would continue the journey, step by step, not as two lost souls, but as two people who had found their way back to the light. The future was still unwritten, but for the first time, David was no longer afraid to face it.